for the next one that we do. But I feel like that would have, gave more energy to this. But, we'll bring the energy in just a few minutes. But let's get started. So thank you everybody for joining. My name is Cody Bernard. I'm the head of marketing of Close Factor. I'm here today with Mike O'Malley, CMO of NoName Security, a close friend of ours over here at Close Factor. And we're going to talk with you all for about the next 30, 40 minutes about how to build a world-class ICP. If you're in go-to-market, this is a hot topic for just about everybody going through annual planning. ICP development is something that's really interesting, right? Like typically, as you start your business, you build an ICP over time based on closing new customers and people using your product and loving your product. And one thing that I think is something that we all need to do better at is revisiting our ICP more often, right? Like right now, if you're looking at your ICP annually, that's great. Don't get me wrong, but it's something that you might want to look into a little bit more frequently, right? Markets change, products change, your business changes. So as your business evolves, the market evolves, you want to be able to adapt and evolve as a business as well to make sure that you're targeting the right people. So I'm super pumped to have Mike here. He's going to help us walk through a little bit of what that looks like in the framework that he uses to build and evolve his ICP. Before we get into that, housekeeping items that everybody loves. Everybody is muted for the time being, but if you do have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. We'll answer them live or do our best to do that. But also, if you want to come off mute and ask Mike or myself any questions, feel free to do that too. We love engagement. And if you're comfortable enough to do that, we'd really appreciate that. Otherwise, we'll get started. We will send a recording out after we conclude the webinar. It'll probably be just about like an hour or so, but we'll make sure that, if you wanted to take this back, maybe dive into the recording, look at some of the frameworks and be able to, take that and apply it to what you're doing. We want to make sure that we're enabling you to do that. And anybody that wasn't able to join us, we want to make sure that we can give them that as well. But with all that said, let's get into the good stuff. Like I mentioned, my name is Cody Bernard. I'm the head of marketing at Close Factor. I'm going to pass it over to Mike O'Malley. I've spoken enough. The real hero is here. Mike, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Hi, thanks, Cody. I could have hummed if you had wanted me to. That way, intro music. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike O'Malley, CMO at NoName. Been at NoName for about a year and a half. Joined from a company called CyberArk, which is another security. Been in the high tech marketing role for the past 20 years. Have worked for just about every kind of company, private, public, government, and every kind in every kind of funding or mechanism, and probably had every job in marketing, and probably shouldn't have had every job in marketing, but have done so. So happy to be here.
Appreciate it. Like we mentioned, we're here to talk about ICPs, ideal customer profiles, and I thought, why not go to the greatest source of all time, Google, get a good definition of what an ICP actually is. I'm pretty sure we're all really familiar with it, but it's defined as the type of company that would benefit most from your product or service. These are the people that are most likely to buy and most likely to give you their money. And these are the people that you want to target, right? If somebody doesn't fit your ICP, why on earth are we allocating time, money, and resources into trying to close those customers? They are not a good fit. They might close, you might get some initial revenue, but over time, if they're not a good fit for your business, you might be looking at increased churn. You might be looking at lower CSATs, right? So all these other business metrics are directly impacted by the way that you define your ICP. So you want to make sure that we can get that right. So before we kind of dive into the content, I did want to ask, how do you define your ICP? So I would love for people to throw it in the chat. Are you more along the lines of A, where you use a mix of firmographic and technographic data? Are you more along the lines of B, you target one or a few verticals or industries? Are you C, you don't really have your defined ICP just yet. Maybe you're a seed stage company or an early stage company and you haven't really figured that out just yet. That's okay. Or D, other, maybe drop a comment in the chat and we can see what we have going on. So I would love to see the responses over time, but I'm not going to put anybody on the spot just yet. We did have one come in, Henry, appreciate it. A use of or a mix of firmographic and technographic data, which I think is pretty common across our space. So love that. Andrew, B, Lena, B, that's awesome. Keep these coming in. We'll make sure that we revisit this towards the end. So I'm going to pass it over to Mike. He's going to walk you through a little bit about how to frame your thinking around your ICP.
Sure. Thanks, Cody. So, I love that. I love that survey because, I've worked at places in the past where I'm not afraid. I'm a little ashamed to admit, our ICP was somebody with a budget and a pulse. And we're pretty much all over the place there. But, I wanted to start this out because I think as you build an ICP model, there are a few things you want to really keep in mind. One of these could all be really focus, but it's important to understand, where your product is really going. Be truthful about that. Do you have that product market fit? If you're not, you really continue to work on it, but have a sense of where it zeroes in, and that, whether it's a specific type of use case or a problem that you solve, or it's a key use case that you just really nail in somebody's pain. Those are two things to keep in the background, and you ask yourself, am I being true to that in this? There's plenty of times where I've been in a company where it's been aspirational. Be like, yeah, our use case is X, but we want to do Y. And I'll get to that in a second. But the third is, do you have enough data? More data is better no matter what it is, because you can, even though there might be some noisy signals in the data, you really do need data from customers, from your salespeople. I often really go to my I call them their sales architects, but sales engineers, customers, especially analysts. Get as much soft data in terms of opinions as well as hard data in terms of where have I won, where's the company winning, where are we losing. Let's figure out what that's revealing. And then I think the fourth is probably the most important. Like, you got to be realistic. There are plenty of times you're like, well, we're a mid-market product, but we really want to be in the enterprise space. So that's our ICP. Or, we're a US-based company, but our ICP is any global 2000, even though I don't have presence in Asia or EMEA. And it doesn't help anybody when you look at it that way. You really have to be honest with yourself. It's okay to start small. I mean, once you nail an ICP, and you're nailing your product market fit, you can grow from there. But there are too many times where a CEO or a head of sales has this idea where you should be, and you end up confusing it, and it takes a whole marketing strategy, and sales strategy off the rails.
So what do you think about if you have like a mix of these, right? Like, you might have product market fit, you might have some core use cases, but maybe you're still early on where you don't have enough data. Like, what are your thoughts about like combining this idea around both qualitative and quantitative data, where you're using some assumptions based on, maybe a rep giving you info about deals they've closed, or a customer success person that's giving you insight into a current customer and what they're really liking? How do you think about the data set around more anecdotal feedback, and how you use that to develop your ICP?
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at it, consider the source. You sort of rely on the hard data first, and then it's almost like a hypothesis. Don't look for an answer when you're talking to people, but you can also prioritize or structure the information you're getting. Like, if a customer gives you specific feedback and gives you advice, you're gonna, that's what you want to listen to most. If it's somebody who doesn't have an angle to pursue, that's another person. When I start with an ICP project, I often go right to sales engineers, the head of sales engineers, and I say, what's your ideal customer? Like, what's the easiest thing that you could do, like that makes, for us, what's the easiest, whether it's deployment or customer success, like, what do you like to see? And could be, they're an on-premise customer that has this, if they're an on-prem customer and they have this specific regulation or government requirement, then it's completely easy for us. And if they have this kind of tech stack, makes the deployment that much better. And so that's a really good start to it. And then you can cross analyze or correlate it with the existing hard data that you might have from wins and losses.
Yeah, that's always fun to see when you have a bunch of different data points from people across the organization of who they think is the perfect customer. And then when you dig into the data, you can start to see like, well, what's real and what's not. And I think that's always just such a fun part. Like, I don't know, for any data nerds out there, kind of diving into that stuff and cross-referencing, to your point, the two different data sets. is always something super interesting, because you might find out something that nobody even said, right? You might find out that outside of just a tech stack, that there's a specific vertical or industry or a specific use case that's popping up more and more with how people are actually using your product that nobody was really aware of, right? And then you can kind of bake that stuff in as well. It's always a fun part of this.
And the negative, and sort of the negative space of data where you're not succeeding is just as valuable. So if you're going through one of the things that if you're going through the losses and you're finding it's it's in a specific industry vertical, or it's a specific space, or you're trying to sell it, like that's as important as where you're winning as well as where you don't want to go. Where the answer is no is quite important, because then you've got at least, you're painting the picture of what the ICP is, but you're just kind of painting the borders around it.
Right. All right, let's get into some of the fun stuff. This is more of like the framework thinking. And before we kind of dive into that piece in particular, ICP leveling is super important. I think in my experience, I posted this on LinkedIn the other day, and I'm not sure if people agree or disagree, but what I've seen in my experience is that when people develop their ICP, it's incredibly high level, right? Like look at just a few different data sets. Like for example, they might target B2B SaaS companies that have between 100 and 1,000 employees, that might be at a certain growth stage and have Salesforce in their tech stack, right? Like while that's incredible, it gives you a good market to go after, that's just not nearly detailed enough. You're not going to the nitty gritty or to the levels that you should be that would define the perfect customer for you, right? So what that might do if you're targeting a bigger market is elongate sales cycles, because people might not be in market, or they might not have a specific need that's aligned with a part of your product. Like those are things that could impact your business and impact your sales and marketing teams and customer success teams as well, as you're looking to bring on new logos and new customers into your business. So when we think about ICP leveling, Mike brought up a really good framework that he has used as the baseline for his framework that he's deployed, which was the Serious Decisions Audience Framework, or now Forrester Decisions Audience Framework. And it's a great framework to use as the baseline for how to develop what makes a good audience or what makes a good customer. So you'll see a little bit of that here, but I'm going to pass it back to Mike to kind of walk through his framework in more detail.
Yeah, I think also one of the first things to mention too is, when I first started building ICP frameworks, and I viewed it as almost hierarchical, or like I had to check all the boxes in the right order or it wouldn't make sense. And there's really no, and after a couple of years of getting incredibly frustrated, I realized that it wasn't, the different characteristics or the different categories in an ICP framework, they didn't have to be one is more important than the other. You didn't have to solve one before the other unless it mattered for your business. And so what I view these as is what's the point of view that you're taking, and what are the filters that make sense for your company to put in place versus somebody else say, oh, you have to nail, this first. And so let me go through this a little bit. The first obviously is, what are you selling, right? What's the offering? Product, service? Is it something else? Is it a combination of that? And, and it can, you can go to the next one, Cody, which is, once you've already got that, it's the thing that most people lean on, and it's the firmographic data. And nowadays it's like, oh, it's a check mark, or, oh, I got this. I already know this is kind of really basic information, but you'd be surprised at how important this is. And even in how important you have to really spend a little bit of time on it to nail it. What geography, like I said, be realistic. What company size, large enterprise, small enterprise, commercial, what company type, B2B, B2C, and then what industry. And so a lot of the time I'll hear, oh yeah, well, our solution, it's usually a salesperson, but our solution is horizontal. We can go anywhere. And you say, well, that's great. I can go anywhere too, but there are only a few places that, I have to focus on, and where am I going to be most successful? Trying not to be, I get the phrase, oh, we have to be opportunistic because we're a horizontal solution, or we could go anywhere. Well, there's being opportunistic, and then there's being schizophrenic, and you can't chase everything. So you've got to get an average of the numbers and say, okay, we're going to focus our efforts here just because it's more efficient for us to do it. And we, it's not that we're intentionally leaving revenue on the table. It's just that, we've got to start somewhere and find out what works and what doesn't. Usually go ahead.
It's like that old quote where it's like, what's your ideal customer? Like, who's like your perfect customer? And it's anybody with money that's willing to buy. And like, that's just like funny, great for sure. And maybe, something that was good when, the tech industry was booming and so much money was funneling into the space and people were looking at, adding every tool that they could think of into their stack. But I mean, nowadays, it's you need to be efficient if you're going to be growing your business. So that just doesn't fly anymore.
Yeah, and it's also, a lot of the times you think about, and I myself personally as well, as you'll think about an ICP as somebody you want to sell to, right? And you forget that the selling part is only one part of the business, and the keeping part is as important as the business. So you don't want to sell into somebody that isn't in your ICP because the risk of churn is higher. And they may be like, oh, this doesn't work for me, and it's because of it could be specifically for anything, but there's a real cost to not getting the right customer. And I've seen it multiple times where we sell it, was like, hey, we got this massive deal, a year later churn, because it wasn't, product was great, but what just wasn't the right fit for that company. And we made short-term money, but you can't build a business on it.
Yeah, we were talking yesterday too, just on a prep call for this webinar here, but we were talking about that too in regards to your overall revenue model, right? Like, what does that mean if you're closing new customers at a very high rate? That might be great for your revenue number, right? Your ARR number that you're looking to hit, or new logo number you're looking to hit. But if that's going to be customers that will churn within a year or 2 years, are you building that into your model where you're going to be able to drive more revenue or more pipeline to achieve those targets over time, right? So like, it's a little bit of, a catch-22 where you might be driving these customers and you're closing business and driving the revenue that you need to hit your number. But at the end of the day, when you look at your overall revenue goals, you might be coming up short in other areas, in which case, you didn't achieve what you were setting out to achieve. So that's always an interesting thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah, cool. Totally. So, again, a tech stack is something else that a lot of folks will pursue. Okay, what else do they have, or what's sort of built around it, or what's supporting? So I kind of I tend to chop them up into supporting, surrounding, and direction. I used to just really focus on supporting, meaning, okay, what is it directly connected to? What are they? Do they have F5 load balancers, or do they have is it sitting on an AWS instance, or is it in that sort of tech stack is important, but as important is what is a little bit further around the tech. What kind of development environment are they using? What kind of, in APIs, it's, hey, what kind of API management that might be having, and then when I take another step, it's okay, what direction are they actually going, or what direction we think they're going? What signals are out there that would tell me that somebody is headed towards a specific tech direction, whether it's a vendor or a model? So past couple of years, everybody, there's been a lot of focus on digital transformation. So for NoName and for other API focused companies, whether it's security or anything, if you see the word digital transformation, you're going to be in somebody's financial statements or somebody's remarks, or even a job opening. You need to understand that that's something that's going to take with it a whole bunch of tech, and that you realize, all right, that this is something I might pursue if that fits with me. Oh, my product is, or my offering is, something that really fits well with cloud native companies. So let's make sure that, not that we're just focusing on cloud native, but focusing on folks who are aspiring to, or in the process of doing so. So you sort of, there are a lot of signals out there that you can build, not just, or, with the Zoom info, okay, I know I've got this, and this. It's one of the reasons that I work with close factors, because there are plenty of those signals that tell you more about the customer than you actually might think at first, and your eyes glaze over when you look at the list of all the technology they have, but then you start to say, okay, let's actually try to build out their environment and see what they really are about. And it's possible to do that with the signals out there.
Yeah, and I mean, having that insight too just helps you build a better business case as a rep, right? Or helps you better target as a marketer, right? Like understanding not just the tech that they use that you can integrate with, but what is the tech that's surrounding their ecosystem? What's the tech that potentially could be needed for them deploying a new project or a new initiative like a digital transformation out there? Like that type of information is so helpful for a seller who's looking to actually get their foot into the door at one of their accounts. So
totally. So, the other is, it's a good reminder is who's the incumbent. I often, in other lives or previous lives, incumbent was right after offering. Like, do we know if it's a competitor environment, we're not going into it, right? If I'm an IDaaS provider and the customer is an Okta customer, and it's not worth trying to bang your head against it. Maybe they're already a customer, that's great. Or maybe there's no provider there and you're in a greenfield or blue ocean kind of situation where you're an additive technology, or you're an additive technology on top of something that somebody might not have. I have a bit of an example further, but someplace where you can slip in. This is when you realistically evaluate where you're going to go to market, and I've done this before in go-to-market plays, is this something, it's a little bit more for more mature vendors, but is this a fight I really can take on? Is it worth taking on? And somebody explained to me once, when a boxer prepares for a fight, they think about how big the purse is. They figure out what's the competition, how strong is the competition, and then they also figure out, is the style of fighting, the style of battle that is it suited to me, or I'm going to have to go at it. And so this is not that I box or anything like that. I just I apologize for using sports analogies. It's kind of overwrought, but it is one of the ways, especially when you think about competition, to frame the discussion.
Yeah, I think with competition, it's always something that's interesting too, because I think you were kind of alluding to it, but I don't know if you were exactly going to get to this point, which was around just like categories and where you fit in, right? Like, are you a business that's creating a new category? In which case, a lot of that is that green field, that blue ocean. That's a lot of demand creation you have to do, which is another conversation for another day. But making sure that it's a market that is something that's new that people aren't necessarily aware of. You might be in a space where you don't necessarily have to focus a lot around competition. But if you're going into a really crowded market, competition is key, right? Like, you need to understand who the players are in the space, who has what market share, who solves for what use cases. Is there a niche within that market that you can carve out for yourself? All of this ICP work goes into help developing that go-to-market strategy. And something that I think is sometimes overlooked, but I think the people that have gotten it right, specifically around category creation, or carving out niches, have done a really successful job of when it comes to building their ICP.
And then again, I think we talked about it earlier. This could be, use case could be right up front versus it could be the main filter, or it could be something you get to this point, depending on how you want to slice the market or how you want to filter through, and it's, what's your main use case? What's the adjacent use case? And what's your suspected use case? So, what's the one nails the pain? What's the one you're like, well, after this we could go into there, and then there's suspected. You can make an ICP for a suspected use case, but don't make it your main ICP. Make sure you're differentiating between these and say, no, this is our ICP for this. And the more use cases you can have that are right next to each other, the better. Or just sticking on the one main use case. But make sure you're being honest with yourself and saying, this is, again, to what I was saying earlier, if it's aspirational, just make sure you mark it as that. Or if it's, yes, we think this might be, or yeah, it is an adjacent use case. all right, how much of extra revenue do we think we're going to get from that adjacent use case versus the main use case? And does that adjacent use case, ultimately turn into, something that's on par or equal?
This is also where I think the leveling starts to compound, right? Because like you might have an adjacent use case where the incumbent here is your customer, right? So a lot of that would be, is there a white space opportunity for us? Like, is there ways for us to be able to increase our share of wallet? Like, this is where we'll talk about it in, a few slides around finding that happy path or multiple happy paths. You don't necessarily just need to have one ICP, right? Like you could have multiple variations of your ICP that all are, a good fit for your business itself. I did have one question about when you think of use cases and your product use cases or service use cases, do you align those use cases to pain points, or could pain points also be a way to frame this thinking around this particular level?
Yeah, you could. I mean, absolutely. This could be you could add another filter. That's what these are sort of Lego categories, and it could absolutely be. And also how you frame your use case is important. It's not critical, but it's important that everyone knows what that definition is. Oh, is this a story? If I'm talking agile language, okay, is this a user story, or is this an epic? Or is this something that goes beyond that, and is really something that combines that. So you've got to, again, make it worthwhile for your own space.
Yep. Awesome. Just checking the chat, see if there's any questions in here. I'll get to them in 1 minute. Moving on.
Cool. Okay. So characteristics, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but what kind of, this is almost a new introduction or a new piece to ICP, and really, to be honest, something I've only sort of delved into the past few years, and really kind of dug into it with the folks at Close Factor, which is, where is the ICP in terms of a level of either maturity or adoption of a technology, or the approach that they take to development, or to to how they respond to in security, how they respond to incidents, what frameworks are they following. That helps you really kind of understand that customer. Okay, is this company really well versed in in a specific dev model, and do I want to focus on that kind of customer? And it's different than from technographic data. It's a level, it's an indicator that shows that they're capable of actually taking your solution and using it. And if you're, or you could actually you could take the inverse and be like, well, if they're we're really good for people who have no concept of what identity management is, or we're really good at somebody who is really having a hard, in the process of cloud, moving to the cloud, but they're just what they're doing is a lift and shift from an on-premise environment into a cloud environment versus cloud native. So these kind of characteristics, there's a lot of data, just as like is with tech, but it's a different type of data, because you're also looking at things like, do they have job openings for this kind of thing? Have they made public statements about this, the direction? Are they a poster child for another vendor for the use and deployment of these kind of models? And so this is a rich vein of information that most people don't take a look at. But it's almost like HubSpot in some ways ruined the notion of personas, because they simplified it for so many business consumers. But this is are these guys cloud experts? Is this a security whiz or security dummy? And so it can be along those lines as well.
Yeah, I think it probably takes a few of these different components, like you mentioned, tech. It probably takes an incumbent and use case, and we'll talk about persona, and it kind of adds them all together, right? Like these are the characteristics of the entire account, right? Like it might have something about tech, great, and it might have something about a project or initiative that they're about to support or to fund, right? But like it could also take into account characteristics about the team itself, which we'll get into. And a few of these, I'm not trying to take some of your limelight here, but like what is the size of a specific team, right? Like that might dictate maturity, right? Like if they're a one-person sales team, or if they're a 1-person development team or a 10 or 20-person development team. They're going to be they're going to be at different points within their journey as a business. And these are the types of characteristics that give you even more insight into how you could potentially solve or provide a solution for a particular pain that they might have at that given point within their journey.
I mean, even you can even, yeah, totally. And one thing I forgot to mention is, like, are they, for dev models, like, are they an agile shop? Are they waterfall shop? Or what's the, what's their approach to it? I mean, is a traditional, it's not, it goes beyond, okay, what IDE or what process, it's what kind of personality is this organization? And, and what, kind of what religion are they following?
Yep.
And then the next is, this always often gets ignored. I ignore it a lot, and I by accident, right? And or in the past I've had. But where are you selling into, and what's the characteristic of that? It's a different type of characteristic, but like, is it are you selling into developers? Are you selling into security or DevOps, or is this an IT play? Who owns? There's an old joke about the blind men and the elephant. Each one of them is touching a different part of the elephant and thinks it's something different. APIs are very similar to that, like in my world, right? That API people, different parts of the organization are touching different parts of, have a different view of what APIs are or do, or who owns it. So when you're looking at a buying center, you really have to say, okay, who's the group that owns this, right? And who's, and what's is this really generated towards that organization, versus sort of, again, horizontal play or too many. I've been at places where like, oh, we'll sell, this is useful across every group. It's like, no, who's got money, and who's got budget and need, and it kind of goes back to, and is that the buying center? And then the last is I think everybody probably follows it, but is personas. How do you, within that buying center, what are the personas you're going to target? Or, and when I say buying center too, it's a collection of the, that sort of, this is very tech focused, but it's like also a collection of, somebody from finance or legal or procurement. That is a buying center as much as anybody else. And I've seen, deals get derailed because they didn't address the notion of a procurement need in the deal until the last minute, and it stalls deals, it derails deals. And so understanding who's in that buying center and then having a message for each, or at least an answer for each of the main pieces.
Yeah, I mean, especially today too, just about every deal is hitting the CFO's desk for approval. So they're very much going to be involved to some degree. Whether they're going to be the ultimate decision maker or not, that's still, TBD. But a lot of the time, you need to build a pretty rock solid business case. And if you're not building an ICP that's detailed enough, it's going to be really difficult to do that. Like, not only just targeting the right accounts and bringing in the right opportunities, but being able to have the information that is going to be relevant to that particular account is very, very important.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I learned this once with recently, when if you're familiar with the MEDDIC sales rubric, MEDDICK, ICC, I think it's now it's been changed to MEDDPIC, which is paperwork in process in the middle. That allows, which brings up the finance and legal folks even more so in a well-known rubric. So this is an example of, this is semi-real world. So don't take this as any advice, because you'll probably get fired. But this is sort of what I did is took that model and said, okay, let's create an example of a company, a passwordless security company that does MFA, multi-factor authentication. And that's all they do. They've got a new different kind of way. And they want to try to figure out what their ICP is. And so I listed out a whole bunch of different options for them, whether, and sort of really filled out the firmographic itself, different options for tech, whether, the incumbent, use case, characteristic, and buying center, to give you a sense of what the options are. And then we can go to the next slide and sort of, what we call the happy path, right? And select. And again, you can you can add a different column, you can move different columns, you can, eliminate them. I spent far too much time thinking that I had to fill out everything and not just think about what the big things were for my business, or adding something I didn't think for. So for this, it was, look, it's North America, large enterprise. It's probably a B2C company, and let's focus on retail, like, Target or Kohl's, somebody with a business presence online that's going to be doing retail online. And let's sort of hone in on companies that are primarily cloud native. So that might be that's not a lot of companies in the retail space. So it kind of narrows it down pretty quickly. I mean, you're thinking about somebody who's graduated from Shopify into their own sort of e-commerce site versus a Target, which I just mentioned, who's got a substantial presence in on-premise in their own data centers. And then you look and you say, okay, what's the incumbent? Is it somebody like an Auth0 who already has the development stack and the MFA, development piece? It's Auth0 is owned by Okta. Development piece and and an offer for multi-factor authentication. Is that somebody you really want to go after, or are they already a customer? Probably not, because you're new. Or do they have ForgeRock? ForgeRock's actually is a competitor to Auth0. Is owned by Ping, but ForgeRock doesn't have a great knock you out easily deployed MFA solution. So that might be somebody we go after. We look at ForgeRocks and say, we can sit on top of ForgeRock and we can make that solution better, and we've got a better mousetrap. And then going through a use case, do I want to focus on guest customers who are coming in and saying, okay, I'm not a known customer, but we need extra protection? Or do we want a known customer as well, that somebody that is has a login, has an account? Or is it something like like this is the suspected use case? Is it a vendor partner? Do we go and say, you know what, we're going to offer multi-factor authentication for vendors who are selling to these retail stores? Now you can cover all three of them at one point, but I wouldn't call that, I wouldn't put it in a single ICP. I'd break it out and do separate. And then what are the characteristics? Well, they probably have to have a level of security maturity, understanding, that they want an advanced MFA versus something they pull off the shelf. And they probably have to have a developer model that focuses on, that understands identity management and can build that in. They're actually building security into the process versus sort of patching it on. And then you go to the buying center, engineering, obviously, and security, because when you're building an e-commerce website or we're building an e-commerce infrastructure, the engineering folks are going to be part and parcel of that, and of course security. But these are the two. In IT, less so, but engineering and security. And then sort of shows, okay, management, the senior VP who's probably going to be making the decision, and of course the end user who's going to provide input. And I don't want to, this isn't a personas, but that's how we went. And go ahead, Cody.
Yeah, I was gonna say, this is the part that's incredibly helpful, where like when everybody thinks about their market that they're going after and defining an ICP, is like everyone looks for quantity. They want, the biggest market possible. And the goal of the happy path is to try to narrow that down to the right accounts, the accounts that are a perfect fit for you. And this doesn't mean that there's only going to be one path, right? Like this is just obviously an example we're walking through that is good for, one specific purpose. Like you might have multiple happy paths. Like the goal of the ICP development is to find which customers are going to close the biggest deals the fastest for you. And you might have multiple paths to get there. So when you think about building your ICP and having, one or multiple happy paths, it's funny to say that, how do you think about rolling that out to your teams across sales and marketing? Like, are you deploying different sales plays for each? Are you enabling the team with different talk tracks and assets? Like, how do you think about basically executing against your ICP?
Yeah, so that's to me, right? So
yeah, sorry.
So I didn't know if it was to the crowd. At a previous company, it was a portfolio company. We had a number of products in 3 different business units, actually, technically, sort of 3 or 4 different business units, right? And so we created a series. We decided, look, we're going to market with this huge bag, and sort of, or with the watches inside the trench coat, like, what can I sell you? And instead we said, all right, each business unit, for each of your set of products, I want to see an ICP for each, for or multiple ICPs that we could take a look at and choose the most effective one. So we went through it, and we had something, at one point we had something like 30 or 40 that we were looking at. And so you had this sort of almost like battle of ICPs. And we said, okay, for our access management team, what are those, what's the actual path, and what are the top 2 or 3 that you can actually, we think we can get the most money out of, right? Let's actually, go with there's a bank robber. We called it, I can't remember the name of the bank robber, but off the top of my head, but there's a bank robber that said, they caught him, and he said, "Why do you rob banks?" And he goes, "Well, that's where the money is." And so it was called the Where the Money Is Project, right? And that's how you can use these. It's okay, all right, I've got 4 competing ICPs. Where's the one that we really actually, now we've got these, where's the one we want to go after?
Yeah, I think with ICP development, there's so much more that comes after it. Like, once you've defined your ICP, how does that fit into your go-to-market strategy, or even segmentation, right? So like, if you're segmenting your teams by, SMB, mid-market, enterprise, or you're segmenting your teams by, geography, like North America, EMEA, APAC, or anything that you're looking at from a segmentation standpoint, this is where you can get even more specifics. You might have your umbrella ICP, and then you take that and you use that to apply it to these different segments that you have to make the success rate of those segments even higher.
Willie Sutton, that's the bank robber. Willie, we call it the Willie Sutton theory. Getting old, I can't remember things as fast as I used to. So I wanted to quickly, I know we're running out of time, but talk about the work that NoName has done with Close Factor, because it's really been impactful for us, and it's also kind of opened my eyes to the creation, an alternative or an additive creation of ICPs, and taking a look at characteristics. I mentioned earlier there was a lot of data out there, and you can take a lot of this data and create these sort of characteristics that ICPs will follow, and it could be a combination of these. It couldn't be, so the idea of a characters being a company being mature in a certain area. They're using the signals that they're mature in a certain area are they're using specific tech, extensive use of protocols or network elements. They've got this many active users of a specific tech. That they've adopted that. They're likely ready to buy if you're a fit there. And we found, these numbers have all been changed. I modified them, but we found when we looked at it, that one deal's had a significant more presence of a specific type of tech. That I put network element, but that's not the actual tech. And when we found out is that these folks had 100 times more people working, 100 more people on this kind of tech than the general population. So it was an indicator to us to say, whoa, this is something that we can seriously view as, like, if a company is mature in this area in tech, that's somebody we're comfortable with. And then you add on to it, oh, they've also adopted a certain philosophy or I say religion, but philosophy or approach, like an established team trained and practicing on, I'm not really a developer, like Agile, or something more specific than that. And the presence of those processes, those policies, that sort of organizational philosophy, that means that they're probably likely to implement. And so we found that our wins had, 77%, of 100 wins, 77 of them had this, when we compared the employees at this company to the rest of the general population, we realized, wow, this is another standout in terms of an indicator of their characteristic. And that, I won't belabor it by going on, but there's another way to look at it, which is a leader in an area, right? This company is a leader. They've already got established big good programs. They're a poster child of this new trend or technique. They're doing things at scale that other people are looking to and saying, okay, this is, they're almost, defining like, SREs, site reliability engineering, like, that's something. It's a dedicated, approach. But what if you looked at companies 5 years ago and said, okay, who are the ones that are really going to double down 5-7 years ago, double down on SRE, and how can I sell that? And that's another way to think about it. So they're characteristics, but they're sort of different characteristics around either tech or how they do their work or what they're accomplishing. And so we were able to take that and then these are, kind of these models, we're able to take this and take indicators from each and say, all right, this is a heat map. This is what this looks like. And this company is large, this is likely, based on your characteristics, the rest of the characteristics of the ICP, and this is an ideal customer for you to target.
Right.
So it's been really helpful.
That also helps you with like prioritization too, right? Like which accounts to go after when, because also these things might change over time. Like you might have an account that fits one of these characteristics, but over the next 6 to 12 months, 18 months, however long, they might also have the second and third characteristic as well. So when you think about prioritizing your accounts, getting them in the hands of your marketing and sales teams for effective targeting and prospecting, you want them to go after people who are going to be in market or people who are a good fit. So when building out your, account scoring models, all that type of stuff, this information is super important to have because you can basically use it as a compass to arm your teams with to go after the right people at the right time, which is obviously everything, that sales and marketing teams want. So.
Well, I've talked way too much. I apologize for this, and hopefully some of it was useful.
No, this was really great. I mean, even you and I have had conversations about this the last few weeks. I've even learned even more. So I really appreciate it. We're going to open it up for questions. We're, running up on time. I want to make sure that we can get people out of here before the top of the hour. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. If you want to come off mute, feel free to do that too. We are going to send a recording out after, we conclude this webinar, and I can get it up on our website and all that type of stuff. So we'll be sending an email out. But yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in. Otherwise, we will wrap up. We did have one question come through from Tim. If you have multiple ICPs, let's say as you're honing in on your specific product offerings, as you mentioned with your previous job, what are some of the challenges and or solutions in approaching balanced territory segmentation?
Yeah, that's a hard one because, you're looking at, you've got, let's say you've got one salesperson for a specific territory and you want them to do both. It really depends on your go-to-market model. And what, meaning like, how do you have people, how many people do you have? How are they segmented across territories? If you, and they're, and how capable they are of selling multiple solutions. But if you can define it and say, okay, these two, the smaller, the fewer number is better. Salespeople are always going to want more options, but if you can narrow it down into leverage, leverage the folks you have in the field versus relying on something like an overlay, it's better. Hopefully that answered it.
Awesome. How long should one spend on the ICP exercise, and how often should you do this exercise?
It should be ongoing. It should, you should spend, I spent the first 5 months like just thinking about what customers, and it also depends on the, your maturity as a company. If you're a startup like us, you're revisiting it every quarter, right. If not more. You're listening to those signals from the field. That's what, especially when you have to listen to your SAs and salespeople to say, no, this isn't working, and live in SFDC. But you should, as a larger evaluation, you should probably be doing it once a year.
Yeah, I think you should be revisiting this exercise as your business evolves, which is going to vary, right? Like you might realize that you just built this new feature that unlocked a new market or a new buying center within a business. So that is a reason for you to go back and look at your ICP. You might realize that, hey, we want to verticalize our product and you want to go after multiple industries. That's another reason to go and revisit your ICP. Or, hey, we want to expand outside of North America to EMEA or maybe APAC or another region. where that's going to come with a completely different ICP than what you have now. So as your business evolves and certain things are starting to take place, that's a really good reason for you to go back and look at your ICP. And you might find that it could still hold true for, a specific segment. You might find out that there's a lot of differences in, another segment that you might be going after. So I would also look at it that way. I think annually is always great during annual planning. It's always great to look back at all of that win-loss data that you were able to collect throughout the year. And I think if you have a product marketing team, in-house, which is always great, they should be looking at this, roughly every quarter. As they're looking at their positioning, they should also be looking at their ideal customer profile. That's something that typically goes hand in hand. So that's just, more of my recommendation on that. All right. I think that was the last question we have. So Mike, we'll let you go. I just want to say thank you everybody for joining us today. Mike, we really appreciate you. I hope everybody got a ton of great information about this. We will send out the recording, so hopefully you can leverage this framework when building your ICPs. But thank you. I appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you. Cheers.